Hello everybody! Today we're going to be talking about adding and subtracting fractions. And this goes with the learning goal. I can add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions. Obviously we're not talking about that second half. So when we think about adding fractions, adding or subtracting fractions, we're thinking about how many of the same size pieces of something do I have. So let's pretend I have 2 pizzas that I've purchased and I'm eating. And I'm going to eat, these are 2 different kinds of pizza, and this one is cut up into 4 pieces, which means it's cut up into fourths. And the red one over here is cut up into 5 pieces, which means it's cut up into fifths. And I'm going to eat 1 piece of the yellow pizza, and I'm going to eat 3 pieces of the red pizza. So now I'm left with 3/4 of the yellow pizza and 2/5 of the red pizza, and I want to know how much pizza in total do I have left. If I tried to grab these 2 pieces of pizza over here and just shove them in there, that's really not going to tell me how much pizza I have left. I need to figure out equal sized pieces so that I can then figure out, well, how many of those pieces do I have left? So I have to think about, how can I cut these pieces up in such a way that they're all the same size, and then I can figure out how many of them go together. So what I'd like to do is say, well, I had fifths and I have fourths. I want to look at what types of equivalent fractions can I use, what kind of common denominator can I find so that I can add these 2 fractions together. So this is similar to what we were doing with comparing fractions. We need to find a common denominator. And so if I look, I could cut up my fourths each into 5 pieces, and I could cut up my fifths each into 4 pieces, and then I would be left with all pieces that were the same size, and I could put them together and see how many were left over. Now, I didn't do this very well, but you can see that it takes 5 pieces over here to make 1/4. So if these were all the same size, which they should be if they were all evenly divided up, then I would need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these pieces to fill in this part over here, and then I would have 1, 2, 3 more left over. So let's see what that looks like when I find a common denominator down here. So I can see that I could change 3/4 into 20ths by multiplying the numerator and the denominator both by 5. And so that would give me 15 20ths. And I could change 2/5 into 20ths by multiplying both the numerator and the denominator by 4. And that would give me 8 20ths. And so then I can see that if I added those together, if I counted up all the pieces, I would have 23 20ths, which is the same thing as 1 and 3 20ths, which is exactly what we were seeing up there. I would have 3 pieces left over after I filled in to make my whole. So my drawing's not beautiful, but you can kind of see what I'm talking about there. I could also show adding 2 fractions on a number line. So if I have 1/2 plus 5/8, I could find, now I've divided my number line here up so that I have 8 equal pieces up to the number 1, and then 8 more equal pieces up to the number 2. So you can see between 0 and 1 has been divided up into 8 pieces, so those are eighths. But I could also find the halfway point between 0 and 1. You can see that this point right here is exactly halfway. It's 4 pieces to the left and 4 pieces to the right. So this would be the same as 1/2. And then if I added 5 more eighths onto that, I'm adding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more eighths, and that would put me to right here. So if I added those 2 together, I would have 1 and 1/8. And I haven't done anything to find a common denominator there. I just used my number line. But it was easy to find 1/2 because I knew exactly where that was. So that's not always easy to do with other fractions. but you can see that again there. So here's your free response question. You should pause the video now and answer the free response question on the form. Why do you need to find common denominators when you add or subtract fractions? All right, now if I'm adding two fractions that have like denominators together, so these two have the same denominator already, I'm going to, in my answer, keep the denominator the same, add or subtract the numerators, in this case add because I'm adding, and then simplify. So if I'm looking over here at writing my answer, I'm going to keep my denominator the same. So I will still have 8s because, again, when I'm adding, I am just counting up the same, I'm counting up how many like pieces I have. And so I have 1/8 and then I have 5 more 8s. So I'm left with 6 8s. And then I just need to simplify that. Both of those are divisible by 2 because they are even numbers. And so if I divide those, I get 3/4, which is in lowest terms and has been simplified. So that's what I would get if I added those two. Now when I subtract fractions that have the same denominator, I'm again going to follow the same procedure. So I'm going to keep my denominator the same, 16, and then I'm going to subtract the numerator. So I'm going to do 13 minus 9, which gives me 4. And then I'm going to simplify. And I know that 4 and 16 are both divisible by 4, so I'm going to divide them both by 4, and that gives me 1/4. So that is very simple. When my denominators are already the same, I just count up how many pieces I have, either putting them together or subtracting if I am doing a subtraction problem. When I want to add two fractions that don't have the same denominator, this goes back to what I was showing you in the beginning. We just add another step to the beginning. We have to find a common denominator. And then we do the same thing. Keep the denominators the same, add or subtract the numerators, and simplify. Now, in this find the common denominator step, we're also including change the two fractions to their equivalent fractions that have that denominator. Okay, so that find the common denominator and then change the two fractions so that they have that same denominator. So if I look at 5 and 3, a common denominator that I could use would be 15. There are others as well, but 15 is the lowest common denominator, and so a lot of times that's the one we like to use. It just makes the numbers smaller and easier to work with. However, you can use any common denominator that you want when you add fractions. You'll just have to simplify more at the end. So I'm looking here at 15. I would multiply the 4 and the 5 by 3, which would give me 12/15. And then I would be adding that to 2/3. If I multiply both of those by 5, I would get, let's see, 2 times 5 is 10. And 3 times 5 is 15, so I'd have 10/15. And then I'm going to go to step 2. Keep the denominator the same. So when I look at my answer, it's going to have 15 in the denominator. I'm keeping those same size pieces. I'm going to add the numerators. 12 plus 10 is 22. And then I'm going to simplify. And in this case, since I have an improper fraction, I could change it to a mixed number. I'm not going to count things wrong if you leave them as improper fractions as long as they're simplified. So you could leave it as 22/15, or I could say, well, 15 goes into 22 one whole time, because 15 times 2 is 30, so there's not 2 wholes there. And then I would have 7/15 left over, because 22 minus 15 gives me 7. So 7 and 15 don't share any common factors other than 1, so 7/15 is in lowest terms. So 1 and 7/15 is simplified, and I don't have to do anything else. Here's a multiple choice question. I'd like you to select all of the common denominators of 1/12 and 1/4, and so make sure you pick every single one there that is a common denominator of 1/12 and 1/4. And then we have one final problem here. A cabinet maker needs a board that is 9/16 inches thick. By how much must he reduce the thickness of a board that is 7/8 inches thick? So if I'm starting at 7/8 inches and I want to reduce it down to 9/16, how much am I having to take off of that board? So I need to subtract those two. I need to do 7/8 minus 9/16 to see how much I'm going to have to remove from that board. So go ahead and see if you can solve this problem yourself. Pause the video now and then we'll see if we agree on the answer. So it's going to be 5/16 of an inch.